I'm spent, I'm done, I'm out of it. I've got no more left.
This episode is for you.
Burnout's always been around. People have always potentially worked too hard or too much, not had balance, and kind of got to a place where their body and their mind were screaming out for that break. It's like a match that's kind of run out of flame.
That's pretty devastating that that's how you feel, you know?
A really beautiful question that I always encourage people to ask when someone is coming to you is kind of go like, do you want solutions right now or do you want me just to listen? Am I making sure that I'm getting enough sleep? Am I eating enough to fuel my body and fuel my brain? Have I got pockets of socialization where I exist outside of whatever the thing that you're focused on is? The research tells us that actually the most at risk are people who really love their jobs.
Just that deeply ingrained identity of I'm pretty much worthless without doing really good work.
What is your form of rest that's actually restorative rest? I think the first thing is just listening to your employee and what they're sharing with you.
The people pleasing and the sort of control freak kind of mentality. And I think also the deeply creative people. Do they suffer more with burnout?
You have this little device in your hand that you have access to every single thing in the world, getting that dopamine hit.
For me, the thing that got really dark was Charlotte. Welcome to the Brave and the Wild podcast. I'm very happy to have you here. I'm never sure if I should call you doctor or not, or address you as doctor.
Technically, that is a title, but I don't feel comfortable with it, so just go with Charlotte.
You don't feel comfortable? Okay.
Yeah.
So, Charlotte Gibson, clinical psychologist. This is an episode that means a lot to me and has been something that when I first planned this podcast, this was the one I really wanted to do. We're going to talk about burnout, obviously, but it's something that has been a lived experience of mine, especially over the last few years. And I wrote an article about it a while ago that had so much feedback, but in hindsight, it was only part of the story. So this, I hope, will finish the story. And I just wanted to touch on, before we get started, who it's for. And I was thinking this morning what I experienced and who might be out there listening, experiencing the same things, because I want them to stay and listen. And I picked out just a couple, which were, if you're sitting at home and you're always tired and you've got brain fog and you're snapping at the people you love and your friends. And I mean this to any degree. It might be something you're in the thick of, or it might be something that you're just recognizing now that maybe you can't recover from exercise as well. This episode is for you, and we will get into the more specifics around it. But I just wanted to make that point at the start. So hopefully if you're listening and it is something that's affecting you, you'll continue listening. So Charlotte, you're a clinical psychologist specializing in the area of forensics. Can you, for the people listening, explain a bit about what your job is, as much as you can talk about, and how you ended up in this job and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Charlotte, like you said. I am a registered clinical psychologist. So that basically means that my job is to sit and talk to people about how they think and how they feel and try and help them, I guess, exist in a world in a way that feels easier, better, safer, happier for them, which kind of links into my day-to-day job, which is where I work across prisons and in the community settings with people who've offended or harmed others in our criminal justice system. And that's something that I'm really passionate about because it is a population that doesn't get always a lot of support for understandable reasons. There's people that are very hurt by that population. And part of my job is kind of enhancing their life to try and keep the community safer. And by enhancing their life, I mean helping them understand kind of what led to that and also how they can do things differently in the future.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so that's an area you chose to specialize. Obviously, psychology as a whole has a lot of different sectors and areas that you can work in. Is that somewhere you see yourself working, for the rest of your career, or is there other areas of interest for you?
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it. I think I kind of found a niche that works for me and just slotted myself in there. But some other areas that I've kind of worked in is I've done a bit of university work with students, studying psychology, learning more about psychology. Other areas I enjoy are things like sports psychology, which we'll talk a little bit about later because I think it really applies to this kind of work context that we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and just
Mm,
generally, like, I'm just quite a nosy person, so anything to do with people, I'm here for.
yeah. Yeah, nice. I think it's the perfect sort of career for someone who wants to understand why people are the way they are, right? Whether it's someone that has committed offenses or someone like me who's just a business owner who has struggles in life like everyone. Especially the topic of burnout is becoming so common. It's 5 years ago when I started experiencing symptoms of it. It wasn't that talked about, and then I started even hearing about it I think it was around COVID actually. People started really
Yeah.
understanding what it was like to probably through a bit of isolation and working at home and overworking and just the stresses of life all adding up. The label burnout kind of took on a new meaning. And that actually leads me into my first sort of area I wanted to talk about, which is before we dive into the specifics of it, why does it matter having this conversation? Why do you think it's such a big topic at the moment? I watched a webinar of yours on first steps, which I'll actually put a link to in the comments because it's an awesome webinar. But you sort of alluded to on there that humans aren't really designed to go as hard as a lot of them do. And I just wondered if you could give me your sort of big picture or some big picture understanding around why it is so common now and why it is so important to address it.
Yeah, like, I really like that you brought up COVID because I think that we'd be remiss to kind of ignore this massive life thing that happened to so many of or everyone across the world to different extents, different degrees. And just we're kind of continuously dealing with the ramifications after that in terms of like cost of living crisis, political changes, all of those things. So burnout isn't a new concept since COVID. Burnout's always been around. People have always potentially worked too hard or too much, not had balance, and kind of got to a place where their body and their mind were screaming out for that break. I think what's shifted is the internet age. We're more aware of what other people are experiencing. We've all had this collective experience of going through something like COVID, and now I'm kind of dealing with the broader societal impacts of that. So there's probably more of us that are noticing it or experiencing it. We're seeing more people talk about what they're experiencing as well. I guess with COVID came a massive mental health crisis that we are much more aware of and much more vocal about. And part of that piece is people being more open and honest about how they're feeling in their workplaces.
Yeah, so it's almost like it was something that's always been there behind the scenes. And again, I've talked to people years before COVID who had, but it was all, they'd had to leave their job or they'd have, even when I wrote my first article, that was about 5 years ago about it. I had so many messages from people saying, and even public messages on the article saying, what are you on about? You had a mental breakdown. Go get help. And I did, obviously. But in my mind, I wasn't having a mental breakdown. There was definitely moments where I think it got pretty bad, but no one really connected with the word burnout. They just thought you're depressed and you're anxious and it's time for a break. When someone says they're burned out, what is actually going on for them?
I think this is what something that we've spoken about that I think is really important to be really clear about is there's different types of burnout and there's different experiences of burnout. I guess the overarching message when I hear someone say that they're burnt out is that they're struggling, that they're finding things hard at the moment, things are feeling overwhelming. I really like this idea of even if we just take the word burnout, right, we assume it's like a match that's kind of run out of flame. That's a really just visceral experience of like, I'm just out of steam. So there's that kind of, I think when people use the term burnout, I think that's primarily what they're referring to is this idea that just like I'm spent, I'm done, I'm out of it. Like I've got no more left.
Does it differ from anxiety and depression and I guess chronic stress, or are they all intertwined with each other?
I definitely think there's parts that are intertwined. Um, I'm going to speak more generally around kind of burnout to start us off to kind of make sense with how anxiety, depression, and trauma and all those other things link in. We don't actually have like a clinical diagnostic criteria for burnout. We have a clinical definition through the World Health Organization, But things like post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety or depression or things like that, those have diagnostic criteria that we know we can clinically say this person is experiencing this. Burnout's still a newer concept, so we haven't got to the place of kind of getting that kind of diagnostic criteria. But there are clinical factors that go into it, such as emotional exhaustion. So feeling really just like depleted, done, emotionally over it, like you can't kind of give anymore. So you're at home, people are telling you things that are going on in their lives, and you just have no more energy to give to them. Then there's also cynicism. So you're feeling really kind of dark on everything, quite critical, quite sarcastic about what's going on, feeling like that loss of identity or joy in spaces. And then your last kind of clinical criteria would be something around reduced self-efficacy or self-doubt. So feeling that you're not able to accomplish what you were before, or not able to kind of achieve to the same extent. And that sometimes can be real because you're so kind of tired, over it, procrastinating that you're not actually
Yeah.
able to work at the same capacity. But it also can be that you are working at the same capacity, but you just don't feel that same sense of achievement.
Yeah, and that's huge. And that if I think back to before COVID, when I first started noticing something wasn't quite right, it was just such little subtle things, like the projects at work that I used to really enjoy, I didn't like them anymore. In fact, I almost resented them for taking up my time and energy. And just other small things like not hanging out with friends as much, and that sort of self isolation, which I think came from a belief that whether it was from the energy levels or not, that I wasn't capable of doing certain things. And the people I've spoken to who have also experienced pretty significant burnout said the same thing. It got to a point where having conversations with their kids was just too tiring. So that became not a priority. In that particular case, as a reasonably young father, that's pretty devastating that that's how you feel.
Totally. And I just think it compounds on itself, right? Like you're feeling like you're not achieving in your work life, and that's something that's important to you. That can be really impactful on your identity and who you are as a person. And then because of that, you're also not able to necessarily perform in other areas of your life, and you feel like you're letting people down and you're isolating from other people. And that just compounds the problem because now you're losing perspective and balance across the board.
Yeah. Do you think there's such a thing as high functioning burnout? I've read a bit about like high functioning anxiety and depression, and I saw it in myself, and I've seen it in other people who still get the work done. They still are a father or a parent or a mother or whoever. They get it done, but they're actually crumbling inside, and it's just they don't communicate that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people relate to that kind of feeling of I'm achieving everything and I'm doing what I need to do, but I don't feel that, or I'm feeling so exhausted, or I'm just like
Mm,
unable to kind of reap the rewards of all of the work that I'm doing because I'm not present in that. I definitely think there's a concept of kind of that high functioning burnout. I think that happens for people. But I think what I'm more interested in, what I think is more important, is actually doesn't really matter to me as a psychologist what it looks like on the outside. And if you are achieving everything, it's what are you feeling on the inside and how are you coping with that? Because at the end of the day, if you are high functioning and you are achieving all of this stuff, but you're not feeling that and you're not feeling good about it, then what's the point?
yeah, right. Yeah, that's very true. So, from a clinical sense, then, can you sort of outline the cycle of burnout, how it begins, the way it develops, and where it might end up? I think that would be helpful for people to notice some things within themselves or even someone else they care about or someone at work or an employee, especially for, managers and CEOs and business owners. But I think it would be helpful to outline from your point of view, what's the criteria and what might be some symptoms along with each stage that people could recognize and think, okay, perhaps this is going on for me. And that's not to say ring the alarm bells, but it's to say more, maybe it's time to take note of a couple of things or make a couple of even really small changes. And if they're at this more severe end of it, maybe it is time to seek some help or make some bigger life changes.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest step in any kind of getting support or understanding what what you're dealing with and what it looks like. And so typically where we kind of start with any sort of job task, anything that could lead us to becoming burnt out is that usually the honeymoon stage. That's what it's kind of called. It's basically that idea that you have lots of energy, you're feeling really good, you're really excited about things, you're really eager to take on the task, and you feel like you have the skills and the capabilities to be able to match the task's requirements. And this is quite common in a lot of new jobs, a lot of new spaces, or if you're in a job where you've kind of been feeling a bit stuck and then a new task comes along that really, really hits you in the right spot and you go, yep, this is for me. So that kind of stage is characterized by a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of feeling good. There's no effects on your kind of sleep or rest. You might just be kind of waking up every morning and be like, yep, I'm ready to seize the day. I'm ready to kind of get this job done. But then kind of when we move from there is into the onset of stress or the onset of kind of the burnout period. This is when we start to notice that like there's a little bit more stress coming into your life. You're maybe losing focus a little bit more. Your productivity is dropping a little bit. It might be that kind of in that honeymoon phase, you've gone for a bit too long and a bit too hard a level and not really giving yourself the breaks that you need. So then you move into that kind of that onset phase.
And I think that's probably quite common in the honeymoon phase, isn't it? Everything feels good. The new role might be good. And again, it may not be related to work. It could be a new relationship or a new I know a lot of it is related to work. I think that's probably quite a high risk stage, right? Where you just, everyone's like, send it. And you do, but
Yeah.
you send it a bit too hard at the start.
Exactly, and because you're feeling good, you wanna kinda be doing it or as much or, like, hanging out with that person or kind of
Mm.
doing whatever it is as much as possible, and sometimes that's a really good point. Sometimes when we're not paying attention to the balance and the cues and kind of not sticking to our routine or kind of not paying attention to what's happening for us, and then we can kind of sneakily slip into the onset of stress phase without really noticing. Um,
Yeah.
like we can survive in that phase for a bit. Like I don't want anyone to kind of sit there and be listening to this and go, "Oh my gosh, I have noticed that like I'm a little bit like less able to sleep because I'm a bit stressed at work at the moment or I'm losing focus a bit." Like that is also a normal part of life. We function at different levels at different points. So it's just a cue that you're to your body, to you, that you need to take a step back and rest at some point, kind of sooner rather than later.
What would you tell someone who was in that stage where they were loving life, but starting to feel perhaps that they weren't recovering as well from whatever it is in life that sort of wears them down?
I think it's really important we always check like 3 basic things, like, are you sleeping? Are you eating? And are you, like, seeing your friends? Are you socializing? Are you seeing people that care about you and are worried about you? So I would check in with those sorts of things first for yourself,
Yep.
like, am I making sure that I'm getting enough sleep? If I'm not, then how can I increase my sleep? How can I find times to rest? Am I eating 3 good meals a day with snacks in between? Like, am I eating enough to fuel my body and fuel my brain? And then have I got pockets of socialization where I exist outside of whatever the thing that you're focused on is, like where I have a personality or a character or I'm someone outside of this task.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome 3 pillars to sort of focus on it. I mean, there's a million things that could actually become stressful and overwhelming that you could try to do to help yourself, but that's 3 pretty I was gonna say basic, it's not always basic, but that's 3 pretty core principles that you can have on your little checklist to make sure that you're doing your best you can with what you've got to get those ticked.
I think it's a really important starting point for any kind of distress that anyone's experiencing. It's just
Mm,
like bringing it down to like at the basic level of if you think about like life as a pyramid, am I getting those base needs met?
yeah. So you got the honeymoon stage and then the sort of onset of stress. What comes after that if you don't or if you either decide to ignore the signs or don't notice them?
Then we move into the chronic stress phase. So this is when the stress that you're experiencing is taking a toll on your body. It's affecting you more long term. It's kind of you can't seem to like I guess in the onset phase for comparison, maybe if you had like a weekend where you just lie in bed and watch movies or and like kind of eat pizza and do whatever was going to make you feel better, that you wake up on Monday and you're kind of like, I'm ready to go again. The
Yeah.
chronic phase, that weekend isn't going to be enough.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. The stuff that I used to use to recharge myself didn't. and
Yeah.
some of it actually made it worse in the end.
I think the other thing with the chronic phase is that like I think we see more of a shift in attitude as well. So you're more apathetic, kind of care less about things, you're withdrawing more. So when I say those eating, sleeping, and kind of connecting with people, that connecting one might feel so much harder. Like it feels like a mission. And then you've got these emotions that are going up and down and you're all over the place. So it feels like the right thing to do is just to bury your head in the sand and kind of get on with it. But actually that's the absolute opposite of what you need to be doing at that point.
That's a really good point, and I think that's also a good point for people to note in friends and loved ones who you suspect might be having a hard time. Are they withdrawing? Are they changing, in the way they communicate with you? That's probably quite a good sort of sign to look out for, that they might need to even, have a chat. Does it get worse in chronic stress, or is that sort of the
Yeah, there are two more. So we're kind of climbing a hill.
Yeah.
With from chronic stress, you then reach into burnout. So burnout by
Yeah.
definition is basically your body and your brain being under a period of chronic stress. And when I think about burnout, and again, it's kind of that differentiation between when someone just tells you that they're burnt out and that's valid and they're feeling stressed and tired, and then there's that kind of more extreme, I guess more of like what the World Health Organization have identified, which is that burnout where you can't function as you used to. So actually, it's not a matter of just kind of having a weekend of rest or a week of rest and then getting back into work. For example, it's like actually, I'm not able to function. I can't concentrate in meetings. I've got these intense physical symptoms, and other people are noticing massive changes in me and my presentation and how I am in different spaces.
Yeah. And just taking the same approach, what would be your sort of game plan at that stage? What's the core or the next level up on that pyramid where it has gotten worse, you are feeling worse, or you care about someone who is feeling worse? What's a couple of sort of immediate steps that should be prioritized at this point?
Yeah, I think in this space, the first thing I would always recommend is going to like your GP or going to talk to someone. If this is a work kind of burnout we're talking about, I think it's really important that managers and employers are aware that that's where you're at. I know it can feel really scary to tell someone that you're struggling, but the reality is if you keep working at the same workload, we're going to move into kind of habitual burnout, which is that last stage, which is where it's chronic and it's really, really hard to shake. So I think
Yeah.
if we're coming back to that burnout, it's going to be a matter of kind of seeking that support.
It's time to
And
tell someone, right?
it's
Time to
time to
have a
tell someone
conversation.
100%. And it's time to change something. Like whether that is your task load needs to be reduced, like your hours need to be reduced, you need to rejuggle your priorities as much as you're able to. Like that, I guess burnout is like we need intervention stat kind of vibes.
For someone out there struggling to articulate how they're feeling, if they're feeling like this, like if it has gotten quite severe, it's changed their personality somewhat, it's changed their energy levels, it's changed how they look at life, how they look at their work, how they operate and function. Do you have any tips for someone who wants to go to their doctor or to their parents or to a friend, or probably more commonly to a boss or a manager? How can they articulate it in a way that they'll be understood?
It's really tricky because you're relying on the other person's awareness as
Mm,
well. Kind of like when we have a conversation both ways, like I assume that you understand what I'm kind of going to be putting across, and you assume that I'll be able to put it across in a way that you understand. So I always come back to like really practical, logical ways. So is it that you need to have a support person with you if you kind of know this person's not going to hear you out in the way you need to be? I think the other thing we all do quite often is particularly as Kiwis, we kind of skirt around with jokes or try and avoid actually communicating what's going on.
it's so funny you say that. It's turning something into a joke makes it feel easier to tell. But then I know personally you're often then left with a feeling they didn't take me seriously.
Of course, and it's kind of
And
we
that's
blame the
not
other
their fault.
person. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's like coming back to like actually what I would always recommend is like make some lists. Like what are you physically experiencing? What are you mentally experiencing? What is like the other, I guess, occupational or functional impact? So are you that you can't sleep? Is it you can't hang out with your friends or you're not able to be the present for your kids? Things like that. So that you can get it out of your head and actually put it onto paper and see, oh, there actually is quite a lot of areas of my life that are impacted. Because I see a lot of people go to their manager and kind of be like, I'm overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
who isn't overwhelmed these days, man? Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot going on. So I think we need to be more clear in our communication when we're telling people how we're feeling. It's you
Yeah.
are overwhelmed, but also the impact of that overwhelm is broader than just that your brain's busy at the moment.
Yeah, so get specific what specifically is overwhelming you. But I think also it's important to say how it's making you feel, right? You can tell your boss you're overwhelmed by the short deadlines. But if I was a boss, and it sounds horrible, I would probably think that's a you problem almost. It's like
Yeah.
you've been employed in this role. But that said, I've had to tell bosses and people I worked for in the past that I was struggling. And I think the important thing is to say, I'm overwhelmed because of X, Y, and Z. But the downriver effect of that is that I'm not sleeping. I'm struggling to go out in public because I'm so anxious all the time. I feel dizzy because I'm not sleeping. And it's not you don't have to dump, you don't have to sit there with your list and dump every symptom, but adding in a element of how you're feeling
Yeah.
physically and mentally, I think people can connect with that more than just being told, oh, I'm just tired all the time,
100%. I always say when I'm working with people on communication, like, no one can argue with how you're feeling. No one can tell you your feeling
Yeah.
isn't true. No one can tell you your feeling isn't valid. So coming at it strategically and I use the word strategically in terms of strategic communication, trying to get your point across in a way that's understood by someone else, coming from that place of this is the feeling and this is the impact it's having is really important. And I always remember something my mum used to teach me when I was starting out with jobs. She'd be like, if you're going to come in with something, try and have a solution or try and have an approach to try and think about so that you show that you've
Yeah.
shown some awareness in terms of what you think you might need. Because it can be hard for employers as well if people are coming to them just kind of going, I'm really burnt out. And it's okay to say you don't know what to do, but if there's anything you can think of or had thought of that might help, raising that as well is always a good option.
That's a good point, actually, not just going, and it is hard when you're really stuck in it, but going there with a solution rather than saying, I need to reduce my hours. It could be, can I work a day from home each week? That will just allow me a little bit more sleep and a little bit more peace. And I think that's a really good call. Especially in the work setting, if you can offer some solutions alongside what you're communicating about what you're struggling with.
I think also, like, we have periods of life where we need more support than others. And I think as a
Yeah.
society, we've really moved away from that idea that, like, friends are there to be supportive to you and you're not meant to, like, be a
Mm,
burden, not meant to put tasks on someone. I know we're talking about employers, but I'm kind of thinking broader now as well, is that if someone is in that burnout phase or you're in that burnout phase, yes, it's about talking to your employer, but it's also about talking to the people around you. Like, what is the practical support? Like, there's nothing wrong with if you live with your parents, if they want to offer to make you dinner every night, like, take them up on that. If you've got friends that want to drop off food, take them up on that. Just find the practical support where you can, and it can be as simple as, like, I say simple. I know it's really tricky to ask for help, but acknowledging and speaking about it is the first step.
and people aren't mind readers. So however bad it feels within you, sometimes you sort of think, well, everyone must be noticing this. They must know I'm struggling. They must understand how hard it is. A lot of the times they don't. Most people are so worried about what they've got going on with themselves. They might notice maybe you haven't been to the last two gatherings. I've got amazing friends because they call me out on it.
Yeah.
They'll say, where have you been? Or we're coming over, and that's not a question. So
Yeah.
it's I think that communication piece could almost be one of those core pillars where people don't
Mm.
know what they don't know. And suffering in silence takes a huge toll. And I think that's quite a global thing to say, actually, not just in regards to burnout. But after this stage, there's one more, which is awful to think about, but you get to the point where you have communicated it, you have started to make some big life changes, you've got some support, hopefully, you've potentially gone to your GP just to rule out anything physical, maybe some blood tests or something. Where can it end up if it continues?
So that's that kind of habitual burnout phase that we were talking about before as kind of the next step up. And that's our last step. So don't worry, there's no more steps. The
Yeah.
habitual phase is where we've kind of done those things that you mentioned, but we need to drastically change something. So that might be a period of time off work. I guess most commonly it is a period of time off work, a period of pure
Yeah.
rest. It can be potentially some medical support for some of the things that have happened for you in terms of physical. So some people have ongoing gastrointestinal issues like stomach problems from being in that burnout phase for too long, and habitual burnout, like it's hard to shake it. It could look like mental health, because this is where depression and anxiety can become more, and that's kind of what we spoke about earlier, that tie together. Habitual burnout is when you see more acute mental health needs.
And is that a result of the burnout, or is it something that just potentially added to the burnout that was already there? I would imagine it's more of a result of feeling or struggling so much for so long.
It's a bit of a chicken and an egg. Like, for some
Mm,
people, it could be that like, they might have never had any experiences with mental health before, and then the kind of burnout period has brought on something for them. But for other
yeah.
people, it might be they've struggled with their mental health for a really long time, found themselves in a situation where they're becoming burnt out, and then that re-triggers those mental health experiences.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty unique for every person. And is that the stage where you'd advise intervention from a professional? As
Yeah.
in, you've gotten past the talking to the family and the boss, it's time to talk to a psychologist or a counselor or a therapist?
Wherever possible, yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm going to be
Yeah,
pro
I should
psychology.
acknowledge I should acknowledge it's not feasible for everyone. What can people do who maybe don't have access to being able to go and see a therapist once a week?
It's tricky. I think there's real benefit to having an external person to speak to, having someone that you can bounce ideas off. And obviously, I'm always going to be incredibly pro psychological support. It's my job.
Mm, yeah.
But there are other options in terms of, there's amazing self-help literature out there. There is amazing podcasts like your own that are out there that people can
Thank you.
listen to.
Well,
There are
this episode I wanted to become a really good resource with chapters that people can sift through, who sometimes hearing the right thing at the right time can make a big difference.
completely. And there are many different, like, TED Talks or avenues or places that you can go to gather information. I do think it's important for me to note that if you do have people, like someone in your life who's a really good listener, and they will not replace a therapist, I'm not suggesting that, but just having spaces you can go to with people that will sit, there's a Brene Brown quote about sitting in a hole with you, not standing at the top of the hole and basically being like, come on, just climb out here, I'll give you a ladder, but someone who's actually going to climb down into the hole with you and go, yeah, it's pretty hard around here, pretty tough. Let's just sit until you feel ready to get out. And here, I'll help you up.
I like that a lot, actually. That's a really good way to put it, because by nature, we do want to lift people out of a hard time, and we do. And I do it. It's like, right, what can we do? How can we move forward? What's the next step? But sitting with someone who doesn't have the capacity to just step out of that hole is so meaningful.
Completely. I think it's where we feel the most heard and most seen. And I guess coming back to our earlier point around when people kind of say I'm burnt out, I think what
Mm.
they're really saying, my view, is that I'm really struggling right now and no one's seeing it. And I'm using a term that's really well known to try and communicate that across to other people.
Do you think isolation makes it a lot worse?
Oh, 100%.
Mm.
I think anytime we're struggling with our mental health or with our emotions, but when you isolate yourself, you rob yourself of getting that support, but you also rob the people around you of providing you that support.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I only ask that because most of the people I've spoken to on the back of the article I wrote, a huge number of them said it actually started for them when they suddenly had to work at home during the COVID lockdowns. And especially the ones that lived alone, suddenly they weren't around their work friends. They weren't able to, depending on who was in their bubble, they weren't able to see family or friends. It was significant in sort of the foundation of burnout starting, I think, for them.
Yeah, I definitely think COVID changed our relationships and how we
Mm.
interact with other people because we were forced to not have those interactions.
Yeah.
And I think this comes down to like really knowing yourself. Like, are you someone who, because I want to be clear, like when I say isolating yourself, I don't mean like if you're an introvert and you prefer to spend some time by yourself.
Yeah.
So it's a different conversation. If that's what's going to recharge you, 100% go for that. I'm thinking more of times if you're someone who knows that having social contact is a value of yours and important to you, but you just feel like it's too hard, no one understands, or you're too tired, those are times where you really need to be doing that. You really need to be connecting with others.
Yeah.
I think there
And
needs to be balance in that. Yeah.
and I think just to back up your sitting in the hole analogy, for the person, if you're the person that's been asked to go and help or asked to hang out with someone who may not upfront say, please come hang out with me, I'm really struggling, but they might say, hey, do you want to come over for dinner? It's like when you do get to the point of understanding, okay, they're going through some stuff, that just sitting with them and not adding pressure by trying to fix it. And this actually, the previous episode I did with Monica, where we discussed her processing grief around losing her father, she said exactly the same thing. And she shared a poem by Joy Kelly about being a bridge. And what I took from it was you can be a bridge and be there to support someone, but you don't have to push someone over it to the other side. Just be there for when they're ready. And that really resonated with me because so many times in the past when I've been asked to help someone, I'm a solutions person. And that's not always the first line of support.
Yeah. So a really beautiful question that I always encourage people to ask when someone is coming to you is kind of go like, do you want solutions right now or do you want me just to listen? Because sometimes there are times where I do want solutions. I might be coming to you being like, hey, Tim, can you help me sort this thing out? And if you're just like,
Yeah.
well, it sounds like you're really struggling right now. I'm like, no, I am. Thank you. Yeah. Could you just help me sort this thing out? Like, I just need you to build this thing for me or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's about being adaptable and flexible and kind of going to what that person needs. Like, and listening to them. I think it's just listening, right? Like, it's just listening.
And it's an awesome point because it gives them the power to decide. They can say, hey, I'd actually love it if we could just sit here and watch some TV or have dinner. I don't need solutions at the moment. The frustrating thing I found was that in a lot of cases, and I'd say it's not just me, I knew what I needed to do. I didn't have the energy to do it. So having someone else come and back up that, oh, you should be doing this, I can help you do this. Whereas all I wanted to do was relax, and the frustration of knowing where you need to be but not being able to get there, right?
Yeah, I think there's two components to this around. When you are burnt out, it can feel incredibly exhausting and tiring to do the things you need to do. So there has to be
Mm.
balance in terms of giving yourself that time to rest, giving yourself that time to relax. Then there's times where sometimes the thing you need to do is the thing that feels the hardest to do. And so it's around finding a way to do that, whether that be with a support person or maybe that is just the one task you need to do for that day. But I think about like this times where I've had periods of kind of that chronic stress phase or that onset of stress phase where the last thing I wanted to do is go out to dinner with my friends. And I have
Yeah.
dreaded it the entire day and not wanted to go. Sorry to my friends if you're listening. And then I have shown up and I've had the best time and I have actually had a
Yeah.
period of recharge and refresh and restoration. So it's kind of
Yeah.
that balance of like thinking, and I guess that's where we come back to, right? Knowing yourself, knowing what you need, and even sometimes knowing that the burnt out version of you isn't always the one that's got the best interests at heart about you.
Yeah. And that's another huge point. Ampara, who's a mutual friend of ours, she once said to me, Tim, when you're feeling like you are now, the best thing you can do within reason is the stuff you really don't want to do. And like you, for me, that was being social. That was at times having to go to a meeting or present a seminar through Zoom even I struggled with. And the minute I got talking or the minute I got to my friend's house, it felt lighter. It was still really hard to be around people because it's so draining for me, especially for people who are slightly introverted. But when I left, I felt it's like someone had given me some magic medication just
Yeah.
to lighten the brain fog and to feel a bit less cynical. And it would often come back, but it would come back when I'd spent another week at home working on my own. So I think that's a very good point, and I'm glad you made it because I would have missed that doing those hard things, obviously in a safe manner, is so important.
I think this is where if you're able to see a psychologist or a therapist, they can do a really great job of kind of creating a bit of a grade, like a graduation, like a ladder towards the goals. So maybe, for example, going to like a party feels too much, but maybe you can start off with like a coffee with a friend that's close to you to go kind of and do that. Maybe having like an everything shower feels like too much. Like when you wash your hair and you shave and you do all of that, like maybe that's too much. But maybe you start with just like a rinse. So thinking about like where can we start and how can we progress forward is a really like nice way because it gives you that sense of accomplishment and you will feel better. Maybe like going to a full workout class is too much, but maybe a walk around the block is actually doable for right now. So it's finding that balance between what is doable, what's practical, even when every ounce of your body is asking you not to do that. I guess that's the burnout talking. That's not really what you need to be doing.
And I think also reminding yourself that that's okay. If you can't go to CrossFit, but you can walk around the block, for a lot of people, that's a real bummer. And that's, you know what, for this period of your life, whether it's a week, a month, or a year, if that's what your body enjoys, just listen to it. Just listen to what your body's telling you.
I really like what you said about like this period. I think it's so helpful to think of it like this. Like this experience won't last forever. So what can we do to just get through this period? And I'm really big on like do what you need to do to survive this period. And that's across the board with everything.
And that's, again, I'm trying not to put too much of my own lived experience into this, but I feel like it will humanize it for some people. For me, the thing that got really dark was this is life now. I'm stuck like this forever. And that was so hard. So remembering that it is just a period of life is really important.
Yeah. And that's like even the case. And I think this is another distinguishing factor I really want to make clear. There are going to be periods of your life where you're going to be more stressed. There are going to be periods of your life that's part of life. It's the ups and the downs. There are going to be periods of your life where your work is more crazy or more hectic or busier and you're feeling more tired. But what we can do if we wind back to those earlier phases is integrate really good habits and routines so that when those periods happen, we don't keep going through the cycle.
Yeah. And that goes back to that foundational stuff, right? It's probably a good time to note if there is a big work push coming up or a big stressful event of any kind in your life, make those plans to be social. Make sure your fridge and pantry have some good food in it or that you've organized to have those meals. Because the minute you slow down on the eating, it just makes everything worse. And then organize the social stuff and plan ahead.
For sure. And it's balance. I guess that's the really
Yeah.
other key term I want to get across. Like we're not saying like you need to book a social event every single night during your busiest period of your life. Like where it's
No.
like have maybe a Saturday night that you know that you're going to just kind of like either do something social or just like have some restorative rest. And might for you might look like cold plunges. It might look like working out. It might look like lying on bed. Like it could look like anything. But what is it for you that really fills your cup back up? And scheduling that in.
Yeah, and the one I missed before was the sleep one, which is so important. And that might even look like if you aren't sleeping well, scheduling time for a nap in the afternoon, which I despised and avoided for years. But when you're not sleeping well, even 20 minutes can make a huge difference at the end of a week.
Absolutely.
Who's most at risk, in your opinion, of getting burnt out? I've always thought it was the people who hated their jobs and were quite cynical people naturally, but that's not actually the case, is it?
No, the research tells us that actually the most at risk are people who really love their jobs.
Uh,
If you hate your job, you're kind of less attached to it. You're less emotionally identified with it. You're less connected to it. You probably like. I'm not saying that hating your job isn't hard. It is hard. There's different challenges accompanied with that. But what can happen is if you're someone who's really passionate or in a career that really lends itself to kind of being linked to your identity. So I'm talking about like helping professions like teachers or doctors or nurses or those kind of things, or people who kind of tie their worth to what that job is and their accomplishment levels within that. That kind of getting that sense of fulfillment from work is a key contributing factor to when someone experiences burnout, because it can be really hard to say no and it can be really hard to put boundaries in place.
mm. And it's almost glorified now through the lovely channels of social media that making work your life and being successful and overworking almost is glorified. And I think it's hard for people to realize that actually you don't have to do that. You can have, going back again to those three pillars, work doesn't really even come into them, those core foundational pillars. And I know what it's like to make work your identity. And what it means is that anything outside that falls by the wayside. And when something goes wrong with work, it's like your life's crumbling around you. For those people that do love their work and they're sailing along, everything's awesome. What's some advice for like future proofing that, and I'm not saying everyone will get burnt out that loves their job. What I mean is what's some things people could keep in the back of their mind or in their back pocket for when loving your job suddenly doesn't feel so good anymore?
It's tricky because I think when you love your job, and as someone who loves my job, I can so relate to this and what you were sharing before. I definitely can connect with that. Is you feel fulfilled by it, you had so much energy, you just want to accomplish it and do everything and do all of that. And I think again, first step, know yourself. Know that you're going to be someone that could be susceptible to this. Know that you're going to have more difficulty saying no to certain things, particularly if like you're in a job where cool opportunities pop up and maybe it's a bit of a fight to get those cool opportunities. You
Yeah.
can get into that cycle of kind of working extra hard to have those opportunities. So I think the first step would be kind of knowing yourself and noticing that pull is when stuff is going not so great for you outside of work. Do you find yourself throwing yourself into work more because it's a place where you do feel good and happy and that you're achieving something? Or is it that because that's the only, like, that is the place you get that positive feeling from, you don't really have that much going on outside of work? And I think this is where
Mm.
that balance comes in terms of first step, know yourself. Second step, recognize that you are more than your work. You are worth more than your work. There is more to you than just what you provide in a service in exchange for
Even if
money,
you
to put it
absolutely
really
love it.
bluntly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even if it is
Yeah.
your passion, you are
Mm.
providing a service and you're being financially compensated for it. And I think that's really important to come back to. And it sounds so clinical and brutal, but actually at its core, that's what you're doing. Yeah, I think just like having that awareness is really important. Having that acceptance as well that there are going to be times where you might feel busier or more stress. And if that's a cost you're going to take, then that's a cost you're willing to kind of have on your body and your mental health.
What does positive and healthy work life balance look like for you? For someone who I'd imagine works quite a lot and is really passionate about her job, how do you ensure you have that work life balance? And are there times where you notice it's not in balance?
People who know me, who are listening to this, are going to be cracking up because they know that this is definitely an area of growth of mine. And I'm not ashamed to admit that.
Yeah.
I think what it comes down to for me in my life is having stuff that I've built out outside of my work. So again, that knowing myself, I'm definitely someone that leans into that, like, oh, cool opportunity, I want to do that, or oh, let's like I'll work as much as I can to achieve what I need to achieve and what's important to me. But I do that with the awareness of the impact that it has on me and then mitigating
Yeah.
that in other areas. So
Yeah.
I never give up on my like workout routine. I know that's what keeps me really like calm and centered and grounded. And when I don't have that, I notice the impact. Again, people will laugh. Like, I am good at eating. Like I eat my 3 meals a day. I might be quite picky, but I am good at
Yeah.
eating food, and I'm pretty
Yeah.
good at getting my sleep. And
Yeah.
I do find time for social activities as well. So actually, there's also these little, which might be helpful for someone else, and it's something I do recommend, is like almost developing these kind of like the self-talk that you've got going on. So how you talk to yourself in those moments where you do feel pulled to do something, or you do feel like you're doing too much, and actually having those really stern conversations with yourself, being like, actually, hey mate, we need to rein it in because we've got XYZ coming up and we can't afford to get sick right now. We need to be actually living in balance. Or I
Yeah.
know you really want to do this and this is really important to you, but so is this other massive life thing that's happening for you, and we need to find a way to be able to do both. I do as well. Just one final point on this is that people do work at different capacities. And I know we might talk about this a
Yeah.
little bit later, but everyone has their own capacity. So we never want to compare Paul with Peter and how they work differently. And I think that's another, if we talk about risk factors, that comparison can be a real risk factor for people if they find that they're often looking at, I don't know, Jim and their team, who's always seems to be able to accomplish everything, and they're not able to. Like, we don't always know everything about Jim and what his capacity is. So keeping that in mind as
Mm.
well when we're comparing ourselves to others.
I think that's a good point for social media as well, right? Comparing yourself
Mm.
to the brands or the people you look up to. You don't know, you don't know what their life is actually like because social media is just their highlights. But B, you don't know if they've got a huge team behind them, helping them. And I think a lot of people are guilty of trying to keep up with people they don't even know, especially in business, especially as a business owner. So I think that's a good call.
Mm.
And it's interesting I like the fact that you have your little cues and the self-talk of, is this opportunity right for me at this point in time? And also, why do I want this? Is it for the right reasons? That's more one of my ones. And
Yeah, I think,
it's not always to make money, right?
yeah,
That's an important one. We all need to make money, but it's not always the right decision to
I
do
think
that,
it's
It's
important to come back to the fact that everything's a choice. But with choices come consequences. So
yes,
choosing
yeah.
to do different things means that you might be making sacrifices in other areas. And if you're okay with that, then you just need to be aware of that and be okay with that.
Mm,
And I
mm,
guess I'm not necessarily talking about when you're in that really chronic burnout phase, because that's a different kind of kettle of fish. But in those early phases, when you notice, like if you are, like you mentioned earlier, choosing to ignore those signs, then you are choosing to have that burnout outcome. And it's how
yes.
you sit with that and what you need to do around that. I will never tell anyone that their choice is wrong. I will just be clear that their choice will have consequences.
Yep. Yep. No, that's a good point. Now, something I wanted to touch on quickly, burnout and all the associated impacts, from my understanding, has a lot to do with your nervous system and obviously your brain and all that sort of stuff. I was wondering if you could speak about or speak to what is actually happening within your brain and your body and your nervous system when you're in this, probably the more severe end, once you've gotten past, the introduction of stress into the more where you're talking about it and things like that.
Yeah. So we have a brain. Everyone has a brain, and the brain responds differently to different situations. So part of our brain is called kind of, I guess it's called the amygdala, but I kind of more colloquial term is kind of like the lizard brain or the earlier brain or the mammalian brain. Basically, that part of your brain that was kind of the first to develop and kind of responds to stress or responds to threat. So where in your brain, that kind of central part, that amygdala, that's where we respond to stress. So if you're someone who is experiencing a lot of stress and a lot of chronic stress, that part of your brain's in overdrive because it's trying to protect you from all different threats, and it's evolved to be able to do that. So in the past, that threat might have been like a saber-toothed tiger chasing you down. Now that threat is internalized as an email or a meeting with your
Yeah.
boss or something like that. And so if you think about like a work day, that's like a lot of saber-toothed tigers that you're chasing and running around. So your amygdala is working overdrive. So that was what kicks in your fight or flight system. So fight is when you kind of choose to, say, fight the saber-toothed tiger. Flight is when you choose to run away from it. But either way, whatever choice that is, your amygdala is still working extra hard. And when all that brain power is being directed to your amygdala, it's shutting off from those higher functioning areas. So your things like your frontal lobe or your prefrontal cortex, well, those are the areas that are more dedicated to kind of emotion management and thought. So basically what's happening is when you're under that chronic stress, that chronic burnout, and you're in those periods, you're less able to think, you're less able to problem solve, and you're less able to manage your emotions, which is why we see all of those mental health effects going on from there.
Do you think as humans in 2025 that we create within ourselves some of these fears that trigger the nervous system to try and protect us? Do you think a lot of the things that trigger it these days shouldn't? As in, you mentioned that it's evolved from protecting us from things that wanted to eat us through to being triggered by an email from a boss or a client. Is that common that we've sort of matured to being triggered so easily?
I think it makes sense given the environment we live in now. Like, we process so much more information than our brains were ever developed to. And if you really think about the development of the internet, the speed at which that has developed, and you think about over the time that our brains have developed, like our brains have not had the time to catch up. So that is part of the reason why I think we're seeing so many of the effects on the brain that we do now. And we still also don't know a lot about how the intake of information, how the level of access that people have to us now. Before, you think about your boss might have walked over to your desk or sent you a fax. Now they can Teams you in a second. So if you think about the amount of information and the speed of which you can be accessed, we still don't really know how much impact long term that has on our brains. But what we do know is that it is continuously activating that same system, which is then causing longer impact, like more effects more broadly on the brain.
For the people who are not in that cycle of burnout, I assume that when something triggers them, say it's a argument with a coworker, or it's a family member asking them to do something they don't want to do, and their nervous system is triggered, my assumption is that they deal with it, it calms down, and they're back to their baseline. For someone who is really stressed or burnt out, when their nervous system's triggered, does it get stuck triggered?
Yeah, it can get really stuck in that space. It can become more reactive because I guess the thing with the brain is the more kind of pathways we reinforce, the quicker that they fire and the easier it is for our brain to go down that pathway. So
Yeah.
if we're thinking about burnout, if we've kind of wired our brain to have this stress response to something that is a task or a demand on us, it's going to go there a lot faster than maybe someone else.
Can we rewire those pathways of triggering for someone who has a very specific trigger or something that continuously fires them up and just ignites that stress response? Is it possible to rewire that?
Yes, it just takes work. So I think what some people think when they go see a psychologist is that they'll have maybe 1 or 2 sessions and then everything will be fixed and their new pathways will be developed. But in the same way that those pathways took time to get there, they take time to be restructured, redelivered, redirected. So that's where that self-talk comes in, grounding comes in, all these different things to kind of recenter ourselves and try and develop this new pathway so that we're able to walk that road a bit easier.
Yeah, okay. And that actually leads into my next question, which you've sort of half answered there. For someone who does have a lot of those triggers or just feels stuck in that heightened sensitivity mode, what's the expectation? I'm guessing it's not something that happens overnight. And I think it's important for people to understand that it can take a long road to actually make those changes.
It definitely can, and I think it's important that people hear that and know that, and it's not a reason to not go down that path, but I can never offer anyone a quick fix. I can
Yeah.
offer someone an ability to feel better in a space to talk about it, but it takes work. It's work called the work for a reason. In terms of rewiring those neural pathways and what steps people can take, the biggest thing is to when you're having that physical response, so maybe that email comes in, your amygdala's firing, the thoughts, emotions kind of shut off, and all you can feel is that, I guess, heart palpitation, chest tightness, difficulty breathing, your body at that point isn't going to listen to reason. You need to be showing your body that you don't need to be anxious. So that looks like grounding yourself. So things like, a bit difficult in a workplace, sometimes people take their shoes off and go outside and stand in the ground. Things like mindfulness, so taking a moment to just process what's happening in your body and notice that for yourself non-judgmentally. But the biggest thing, and the thing that I think is the most useful, is just slowing your breath down. Slowing your breath down, taking those big diaphragmatic breaths, belly breathing. There's so many breathing resources and breathing mindfulness exercises online. Like, just find the one that works for you and practice that and have that be part of your daily routine.
I do a lot of the guided sort of breathing exercises on YouTube, especially recently, actually. Just take 20 minutes in the afternoon and go and lie on the couch and close my eyes, and just, because I'm terrible at just doing it myself, but having that video playing on my phone, which I just listened to, where someone guides you through the breathing exercise. Again, you open your eyes at the end of the 20 minutes and it's so refreshing.
Totally. And there's so many benefits to breathing properly and helping our body and our breath calm ourselves. Like, the breath is what grounds you. So using that as an easy, it's not always easy. I'm acknowledging that it's not always easy, but it's a quick way. And once you practice it a bit more, it does become second nature. So in those moments, ideally what we want to get towards is your body has that physical response, because we can't always change that overnight. But your breath kicks in. So that way it's just soothing it every single time.
What sort of personality traits do you associate with? I know we talked about the type of personalities, as in the people that really love their jobs being more susceptible to burnout. I know, again from experience, that personality traits like perfectionism and the people pleasing and the sort of control freak kind of mentality, and I think also the deeply creative people, do they suffer more with burnout?
Yes. So everything you just listed, those are all risk factors for burnout. So if you're someone who is perfectionistic or really likes to do a good job, beyond and above what is reasonable, or if you're someone who finds it really difficult to say no, not just in a different, like in your work setting, but across your life, you're someone who kind of leans in towards self-sacrifice or putting others before yourself. All of those little traits that we hear about, like those type A personalities, that is definitely a more of a risk factor for burnout than other groups of people.
And can you, for those people who are very structured and sort of, especially on the perfectionism side, when they notice they're starting to struggle with some of these things, can they perfectionism their way out of it, or be, you know, my the way I tried to fix it before I actually started fixing it properly was to create structure and be productive and write a million daily structure plans that I never actually followed. Does being productive and managing your time and analyzing everything actually help, or does it make it worse?
I think
And
it
again, I
depends.
assume it's unique. It's probably
Yeah,
unique to the person.
I think it depends, but I loved the idea of what you were talking around like someone who is perfectionistic. They often are like the perfect therapy clients, the perfect burnout management people, because they're
Yeah,
like, this is the
yeah,
this is
yeah,
the steps and this is the
yeah.
to do and this is how I'm going to achieve that.
Read all the books,
Read it
read all the literature,
exactly.
and you
Read
said that
read
that's
everything, absorb
important.
everything.
But you can overanalyze it, right? Which I think creates even more stress, because you take in so much information and make so many plans, and there's just too many to actually pick one and start on.
Yeah.
And actually, as I say that, it brings me back again to your, the bottom of that triangle of, that's the good place to start, and work is almost secondary to that, I think.
I definitely think that starting at the base is important. And I'm going to say something that's going to make every inner perfectionist panic right now, but also learning to just sit in the mess, sit in
Yeah.
the chaos.
Yeah. Okay.
Joshua.
I can hear my friends laughing now. But no, I know what you mean. It's the few times I've managed to do it, it's quite liberating.
Yeah. And actually rewiring, which is a lot of work, as we've talked about, but rewiring that connection of identity to, I must accomplish, I must achieve, I must be the best version of myself in every space. And actually reframing that to, I'm just good enough as I am.
So letting go of some things is probably more helpful in a lot of cases than taking on more stuff to try and you can't what I'm trying to say, I guess, is you can't always manage yourself out of something.
No. And you especially can't do it by yourself.
That leads me into a discussion around how you actually recover from burnout, like specifically. And my first question for you, and again, I know this is going to be individual and unique to different people. In your opinion, what does rest actually look like? Because using social media as an example again, the way people tell you to rest on there is vastly different depending on who you're listening to. And I know there's active relaxers, I know there's very non-active relaxers. What does real rest look like for you? Or if you were talking to a friend or a patient and you actually wanted them to genuinely take some time out and rest, what would you say to them?
I guess the first point I want to make is that I want the world to move away from just the idea that there's one form of rest. There's actually so many forms of rest. Sleeping is a form of rest. Talking to your friend on the phone can be a form of rest. Doing some mindless activity at work can also be a form of rest from other tasks. Like there's different levels and layers to rest. And I think the birth is, if we come back to that, know yourself, what is your form of rest that's actually restorative rest? So is that you're someone, I think about times that I've gone hiking with one of my friends and we've spent the entire weekend in the woods doing really intense physical exercise. But I have felt the most mental clarity because I've actually got mental rest because all I've required to be thinking about is when are we going to stop for a snack and how steep is this hill going to keep being? Like that's all that I have to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like coming back to you as a human, having this buffet of rest options that work for you and kind of checking in with yourself every day. Like today, do I need the shrimp rest or do I need the like steak rest? Like what is my body craving right now? Is it
Mm.
craving lying in bed watching mindless reality TV for hours or is it craving me to go for a swim in the ocean? Understanding that rest is multi-layered and individual is really important.
Yeah, so I think the better question would be, how do people find what their rest is rather than what is rest? Because like you say, that's a never-ending conversation, really. I think the more important task rather than resting is finding what your rest is and what really recharges you. And that might be multiple things for different levels of recharge, but you're right, and that's a good point. Just telling someone to rest is a very open-ended book.
And I love what you said around like how like actually asking yourself, how do I like to
Mm.
rest? And maybe if you haven't had the opportunity to rest before, or you feel like you've just been running through life and never really asked yourself that question, try some things. Like just try different forms of rest. Like if you're, or just to be really blunt, if you're already feeling tired, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to feel tired again.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you could feel better. So just trying different things, exploring different things, different options. Like I know I'm going on about cold plunges. I recently discovered cold plunging and sauning, and that's a new form of rest that I think is really, really valuable for me. It's something that activates my breath. It's something that resets my nervous system. It's something that I thought I was going to absolutely hate, but have grown to really love. And had I not tried it, I would have never known.
Yeah, I've actually been reading a bit about saunas in particular and the health benefits mentally and physically. I've tried to have some cold showers, which didn't go very well, but I have been told a cold plunge is actually quite different to just turning the water cold in the shower. It's something I see a lot of athletes doing for their recovery, but it's interesting how good it appears to be for the mind as well. And if you can I asked you before, how do you calm down your nervous system? You just said that's sort of a good reset for it. That's probably quite a good point because a lot of people would also have access to at least a sauna in their local recreation center or their local gyms as well, which they could use. And that's up until recently not something I'd even considered as being a form of relaxation or of recharging and resetting.
And like we have very cold water bodies all around New Zealand at the moment because we're getting
Mm,
into winter. Like the ocean is a perfect option for if you want to try some cold water plunging and just make sure you have a warm shower afterwards.
mm,
I guess the other thing to think about that can be really beneficial to reset the nervous system that is a form of rest in a different way, which a bit controversial, but an exercise. Exercise can be a rest for your brain. I think about like I go to regular Pilates classes and I often don't think that entire time. And it's not necessarily a rest for my body, but it's a really nice rest for my brain. And that's another way we can reset our nervous system by flooding it with different hormones and different like dopamine and oxytocin and all that. I don't know how to say that one. Oxytocin. Oxytocin. There we go.
It's your job to know how to say that one.
I
know. That's a good cue into actually, I did want to talk to you about sport and training and exercise. I see the upside of it depending on what you're doing, but I also believe it could hinder your recovery, couldn't it?
Yeah. It's about finding the right type. Like maybe instead of running a half marathon, it's going for a swim at your local pool and doing like 200 meters.
Yeah. What would you say to all the coaches, gym owners, managers of athletes, right through to personal trainers at local gyms training clients? Do you have any advice for them in looking after the people that they help in regards to burnout, as it being such a big factor in life these days?
I think there's a really unique opportunity for those groups of people to really be able to identify and intervene with people that are really struggling. I think often the gym is a place that we go to reset, to get stronger, to build muscle, all of those good things. And like I said, I am recommending moving your body as a way to manage burnout, but it can tip over into another area for just perfectionism and overachievement and burnout itself. There's clear achievable goals. You are gaining muscle or you are losing weight or whatever that goal is. And it's a simple equation of the more you put in, the better the outcomes you're going to have. So it can be really easy to slip into that mindset of, well, I'll just go every single day, maybe twice a day some days, and then that way I'll gain the benefits that I'm going to be looking towards and I'll feel better. But in the same way with like work burnout that we talked about, you're not giving yourself balance or time for that rest. And I think where gym owners, personal trainers, coaches, those people can come in is you'll be seeing that for people who are coming in. You'll start to notice that they're not gaining the strength they are needing to, because we need to have rest as well. And so I think there's real value in tapping someone on the shoulder and just pulling them aside and just be like, hey, I noticed that you're in here a lot and it might be that you're going through something at the moment. I don't know, or maybe you're just working on your goals, but like just wanting to remind you that rest is really important too, or finding a way to kind of integrate those sorts of things into those spaces.
Yeah, nice. I like that. And they're sort of in a privileged position, I guess, of probably being able to notice more than most other people would in day-to-day passings, right?
And I think on rest, with that example, I guess we are going to have greater gains in different spaces when we are rested. So you're going to gain more muscle
Yep.
or lose more weight when you balance it with rest. You're going to achieve more work when you have more rest. Rest is so important. It's so like what we need to be doing to be able to refuel and reset and restart.
I acknowledge for some people it's feasible to take a few months off work. Again, this is for the more severe. For the people who can't, who don't have the luxury of being able to take a whole heap of time off, or maybe don't have amazing support, what would you say to the people about the sort of ebbs and flows of life? As in, no one's ever going to be 100% happy and healthy all the time. Do you think accepting the fact that life will always be up and down, and like you mentioned and we discussed before, there's going to be times in life, universally for everyone, where life sucks or it's really hard or something really bad happens? Does leaning into that and accepting that that's just part of it, is that a really good sort of facet of recovering from burnout?
Yes, but with conditions. Because I guess when I talk about accept, I'm thinking accept doesn't mean we don't respond to it and don't do anything about it. Accept
Yeah,
just
okay.
means that we accept that this is the way that it's going to be right now, and these are the actions I'm going to take, rather than fighting against it.
Yeah.
So there's an idea called radical acceptance and something called dialectical behavioral therapy by Marshall Linehan, which is a really beautiful concept that I think has real value in lots of different spaces, which basically argues that when you're faced with things you can't control or challenges outside that you can't deal with that are kind of bigger than you can surmount, accepting what is within your control and accepting what you can do and what you can control is the first step from there. So maybe in your workplace, you can't control your hours, your boss, your work, like what your tasks are. Radical acceptance would argue that rather than fighting against that and kind of trying so hard to achieve all of that, or potentially becoming more unhappy or hostile in the workplace or whatever it's going to look like, radical acceptance would argue that you're in control of how you feel about that and what your experience is. And so accepting that I can't control the workload, the tasks, but what I can control is the amount of effort I put in my response to it.
Yep, that's a nice explanation, actually. I like that. And that kind of leads into a note I had written here actually about recovery not being linear. And that's something I think is really important for people to understand, that you might feel better and then feel terrible again. And that might happen 20 times over, and that's just part of life. And battling against that is a lot harder than like you've just been talking about, accepting that that's just the way it is, because that's one thing you actually can't, within reason, you actually can't
Yeah.
control that. As long as you're doing your best with what you have, it will be up and down. It will be a step forward and 2 steps back at some points. But I just wanted to make a note because it was something that took me years to accept. And when I did, and some days I still don't, and it pisses me off, but it's when you do accept that it's not linear, and that doesn't actually just go for burnout, to be honest. It does make life a little bit easier.
Definitely. And I think all of the emotions, and that's what I mean when I'm saying like sitting in the mess, sitting in the chaos, all the emotions along that journey are useful and valuable and teach you something and you learn something from them. They're all welcome. I'm not saying they're fun or enjoyable, but that linear journey, like that non-linear journey, all of the emotions that come along with them are all welcome to be there.
I see a lot of content floating around, because I digest a lot of it, as we do these days, talking about dopamine and distraction and social media and their associations with modern day mental illness, especially in relation to burnout and anxiety. Dopamine hunting is something I see a lot of. Is it a real thing? And can you explain it in the context of, I think social media and burnout would probably be the most relevant to people listening to this.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, like we talked about earlier, our brains are seeking that sensation or seeking that kind of, but they're just looking for things. They're just looking for stimulation, looking for things in the world, and whether that be a threat or whether that be something positive, either way, it's always scanning. So then you imagine you have this little device in your hand that you have access to every single thing in the world, basically. Particularly now with ChatGPT, you can ask it
Yeah.
anything in the world and it can tell you any answer. And you've got nice little videos that will distract you and occupy your brain, and you get that little rush every time that you look at something that's giving that your brain that stimulation. So you're getting that dopamine hit. What we do see though is that often, and I can speak to this from my own personal experience, is like maybe if I spend an hour scrolling, I don't feel any better after that. I might have felt good
Mm.
during it, but afterwards, it's
Mm.
not a long-term, actually effective way of managing your mood or managing burnout. But it can feel really tempting in the moment to sit there and scroll because it's a distraction and it supports that numbing of whatever you're feeling inside.
Yeah, and that you've actually just answered my next question, which was going to be, does lying on the couch scrolling Instagram or TikTok or whatever, is that relaxing? Because, from the outside, you're lying down, that's nice and relaxing, but that's keeping your brain pretty fired up, isn't it?
For sure. Like if you think about how much information you're taking in, even in a TikTok video or like an Instagram reel, there's so much happening. There's like a sound, there's like all this stuff going on. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be having low stimulation, but if you compare it to something like a TV show or a podcast,
Mm.
which even that lowers the level of stimulation, and then you get like a book, and that's even kind of another level. So being really mindful of how much how much stimulation can I take on board right now, and how much is it actually going to help me feel more rested or more mindful?
And when your brain is very stressed out, I think even that stimulation could be perceived as stress, couldn't it? It's still an
Mm.
activation and still a trigger, and it's still, like you say, it's so different to lying there with your eyes shut, or lying there reading a book, or even lying there looking across a room at a big screen with a movie you really enjoy on it. I personally find that a really good way to relax. But when you've got this little screen in your hand, like you say, because I do this for a living, I build these reels
Yeah.
with the idea of, grabbing people's attention and stopping them doing what they're doing. And you do it with sound and text and very bold hooks. So they're hearing and seeing things all at the same time. Do you think social media and phone addiction is a real thing?
Anything can be kind of addictive, but whether it would meet kind of the clinical criteria for an addiction, I wouldn't be able to speak to. But I definitely see a dependence. I think people have a huge reliance on their phones, and I'm also putting myself in that camp, a huge reliance on social media to stay connected. And I think that's where we've kind of lost a bit of the meaning in terms of like how, if you think about how much time you're on Instagram, for example, how much of that time is like seeing your friends' photos and talking to your friends versus how much of that
Mm.
is just watching other people's content and comparing yourself to them. So
Yeah.
asking yourself what I think that again, know yourself, know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Am I picking up my phone because I actually want to look at some alpha inspiration and I'm just scrolling for that reason? Or do I really want to just numb out and fully occupy my brain with something? And if you're choosing to do that for that reason, do that with the awareness that you're potentially not going to feel much better afterwards. But if you're choosing to do that, that's your choice.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Like you said, that sometimes when you do it, you feel bad afterwards or you don't feel
Mm,
better. That's probably a good marker, right? If you can do that and get up and carry on with your day and you feel fine, good on you. Like, sure, everyone can do that for a short stint every day, but if you're doing it and you put your phone down and you feel, especially like fatigue and brain fog, I think that's your brain telling you you're probably a bit overstimulated, right?
definitely. And I guess if we come back to when you're in those burnout phases, it can be really tempting to sit into that space of look how much everyone else is doing and accomplishing, and they're managing to do all their work and continue to have this amazing social life. And I can't even seem to get out of bed. And why are they able to do that? And why am I not? And
Yeah.
how much that reinforces the space that you're in where your head isn't like able to see things as clearly or able to have that perspective or balance.
Yeah, so it's almost like the lingering psychological effect long after you put your phone away. It's not just how you physically feel, as in, shit, I was overstimulated, I've got a headache, but it's how do you feel about yourself afterwards? I'm guilty. I look at it and I look at heaps of other podcasts and I'm like, oh, I wish I had it. And I put it away. And my justification was I'm doing research. How do they present their podcast? Blah, blah, blah. How do they light their studios? How do they talk? And what I was finding, I did it so much that at the end of it, I'd come away thinking just with these stuck thoughts of, oh, my podcast's so amateur. Like, why am I even bothering doing this? And I think everyone has moments of self doubt, but it was directly resulting from that hour I spent watching snippets of other people's podcasts, which
Absolutely.
is
Because
which I'm very conscious of now, and I don't do it anymore. I watch a little bit on the TV on YouTube, which I don't find so overwhelming, but the little snippets that are really psychologically designed by a designer to make you love that little piece of content, it just left me feeling really flat about what I was doing, which actually I know has a lot of meaning and it's new, but everyone's got to start somewhere. But you don't think about that when you've been watching these reels, you know?
exactly. And again, I know that it's such an oversaid statement around like social media isn't reality, but I think that doesn't actually bring the meaning to it. Like if you think about that example you just shared, that's like maybe 30 seconds of someone's setup or like a couple minutes. And if you think about how like to be transparent, I told you today, like I'm moving house at the moment. So like behind me is like
Yeah,
this nice
yeah,
window. Around
yeah.
me is chaos, but no one watching this would have any idea about any of that if I didn't share that. And I guess we
You're
lose
right.
insight into that.
And the other thing is, and I said it before, a lot of these podcasts, just using that as to finish the example, the couple of big ones that I watch, they have teams of 50 people running their podcasts and full camera and audio, video. And I'm sitting here in my spare room, which I love that I can do this, but I'm trying to compare myself to them
Yeah.
and it makes me feel shit. And that to me is like quite manageable, but I'm sure there's, for a lot of people, it gets to a point where it's actually really harmful.
Definitely. I think when you lose, and like we talked about coming back to the burnout idea, your amygdala's firing, you're less able to do that like thought processing, balancing of evidence and thinking more logically. Losing that, then you're less able to kind of interpret the content you're seeing through the lens of this isn't someone's real life.
Carrying on our theme of recovery and shifting it to the role of workplaces, managers, head honchos, whatever you want to call it, anyone that's got people under them or employed, what's their role in, and I'm talking like probably more big picture now, not specifically helping an employee, but I guess what's their responsibility in creating a good environment to help start reducing this as a big picture sort of issue?
Yeah, I like your use of the word environment because I think it is a culture shift. And I think it starts from the top or the organizational systems and structures in place. So if you as a manager are aware of your high capacity or your tendency to work on that onset of stress phase potentially, or kind of have your own experiences with that, making sure that your expectations and what you normalize isn't what everyone is expected to do and achieve. So I think actually you have responsibility to show that you are human and that you have your own difficulties or challenges, and you're kind of the same way in social media where it's like actually maybe you're someone who does work at a high capacity or can achieve more or whatever for whatever reason, being really transparent about that, and actually showing the awareness that that's not always the expectation and the norm for the wider group. So if things like out of offices around, like I might respond outside of normal work hours because I have my own other things, like I might have kids to pick up or other reasons. So that's why I'm working at 9 p.m. at night. I'm not expecting
Yeah.
anyone else to be doing that. Or
Yeah.
having awareness that there might be periods of time, like we talked about these different, where we are going to be under more stress, but making sure that that's not the norm and not always that is the case. And if that is the case in your workplace, then something needs to broaden, needs to shift, because no one can work at 100% capacity all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then getting more specific, again, for the managers and the bosses, if they do have an employee come to them and communicate that they're struggling, and like we talked about before, the ways to communicate, what's some ways they can help them? And is it their role to help them? Sorry, it's not really their role to fix them, but how can they help them? And what's the difference?
I think the first thing is just listening to your employee and what they're sharing with you. Because I can imagine it would be tempting to kind of be like, oh, but that person like hasn't had much work going on their plate for a while, or well, this person's able to do all of their work, and kind of entering into their own comparison. But actually listening to what that person's sharing is the most important thing, because what they're trying to tell you is that they're struggling and they might not communicate it in the best way. And we've talked about some earlier ways that they could try and communicate it differently, but actually trying to listen with that caring, empathetic perspective of what are they saying to me, not necessarily what am I wanting to hear or how am I wanting to listen to this. In terms of solutions or kind of how you can support them, is like within good teen cultures, you want to have good pathways for someone who's struggling. So maybe it's that you have options like EAP or other employment assistance programs, and you can refer someone to that. And the culture around that isn't this is where you go when you're struggling. It's actually like this is just what we all do to kind of manage difficult times that we're all going to experience in life. So I think it's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of pre-work that happens, and then if you haven't managed to do that pre-work, it's like maybe you need to set the precedent of kind of being like, this is an option that you could go to. Like maybe this is something we could talk about as a team, not necessarily about you specifically, but you've just reminded me that this is an option and that we should be making sure this is available to everyone and everyone knows about it.
Yeah. And those EAP programs are becoming, I mean, even 3 years ago, I had no idea what they were. It was through some
Mm,
work I do, I actually found out that they existed. And friends who own businesses, most of them have set them up for their staff. And from what I understand about them, they're brilliant. And
mm,
I've actually got friends who have utilized them through their companies as well, who in a couple of cases, actually, it's changed their lives quite significantly. And they were struggling a little bit around work, went through the EAP program to see a therapist, and actually got a diagnosis that explains a lot about what he's always struggled with and
wow.
why he struggles now. And it's such a, I guess, for the company the size or the organization that he works for, having that EAP program is a drop in the bucket. But
Mm.
for him as an employee, that's life-changing. So if you're a business owner and you have staff, I think looking into something like that is really meaningful for them. And to me, if I was ever looking to be employed by someone again, having that on offer would be a really big factor in me deciding to work for them, I think.
Definitely. I think there's huge benefits to things like EAP. And I guess more broadly in like that employment management boss structure, like you hypothetically, depending on your role, have the ability to move work around to be responsive to
Yes.
someone's situation. So I think just remembering that you have the power with that as well. So yes, we can kind of provide that person some wraparound support, but also in your role, there is scope for you to be responsive to within the reason of the structures that are in place in your workplace to be responsive to that and to be aware of
Yes.
maybe this person isn't able to actually this person isn't able to do what they need to do right now. And most important at the end of the day is our health and how we're functioning in all spaces, not just in our workspace.
For someone who's done the hard yards from whatever piece of the puzzle they ended up at, they've had conversations, they've s- made changes with work, they've sought therapy. They're starting to feel better. They're calm, they're not so triggered, they're relaxing, they're sleeping better. What are the risk factors in it reoccurring? And how can those people that do start recovering really shield themselves from, for lack of a better word, relapsing?
Yeah. When you start to feel better once you've been through a period like this, it can be so if you haven't kind of done the work and kind of understood what led you into that pathway, you're just gonna go straight back into it because it's you're gonna
Yeah.
feel so much better and so ready to seize the day that you're gonna wanna just jump ahead into something else. So I guess having done the hard yards kind of that I think it's important to be aware that that looks like actually really understanding for yourself what your own risk factors are, because that's what's gonna
Yeah.
make you vulnerable to doing this to having this experience again.
For people who have gone down this route of, actually, it's probably just easier if I use myself as an example. The perfectionism, the overworking, but the just that deeply ingrained identity of I'm pretty much worthless without doing really good work. For that's been a huge part of my life, which I've learned through therapy in recent years, actually comes from beliefs I've held really close to me since I was a child that around I'm not good enough. And I think that's something that people would resonate. In fact, I know it is because I've had conversations with people. What you've just said about not really identifying the reason behind the burnout. You can say I'm burned out because I overwork. That's a very surface level thing. You can dial back the work and start to feel better. But if you haven't fixed what was under the surface, the cause of the overworking, like you've said, you're just going to go back. And I don't even know if I've got a question here. I think it was just a point I wanted to make that probably when you're getting to that habitual burnout, especially if it's recurring, my advice, and I do acknowledge it's easier said than done for a lot of people, is to, however you can, even if it's through an EAP program at work, talk to a psychologist or talk to whoever you can to really understand and identify the what's under the surface. And it's not in a lot of cases that you just really, really like your job.
Exactly. I think that's a beautiful example, and I appreciate you sharing it because I think so many people will relate to what you just spoke to and it connect with actually if they really look inwards. And that's why I keep harping on about know yourself because
Mm.
that's the greatest skill you'll have is how you can, if you're aware of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what your vulnerabilities are, it's the best way that you can manage them moving forward.
Yeah, nice. And I think that's quite a good point to end on, actually. We've sort of discussed the full cycle, the how it starts, how it stops eventually, the role workplaces play, how to support someone. I know we structured a lot of it around employer employee, but I think a lot of it applies to friendships as well, right? Or family members if they come to you and ask for help, the same information applies. Is there anything you would add to that for on a more personal level, if a friend came to you or a partner or a child came to you or a parent even and said, hey, look, I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling myself. Energy's low. Apart from, I mean, my first thing would be go to the doctor and just get some blood tests because I'm such a practical person. But is there anything else you'd add just on that more personal level of how to support someone who's battling it?
I think again, it comes down to sitting in that hole with someone. So as a friend, being that person to connect with them, understanding where they're at, not presenting your own judgment on, well, I told you were working too much. I knew this was going to happen. Like that is the least helpful thing that anyone can ever say to anyone ever. Um, but it can be really tempting and quite frustrating when you're a friend or a family member of someone who falls into this kind of camp of overcommitting themselves to things or leans towards some of those core beliefs that you spoke about. And I guess with your awareness of that person being that kind of person, you're probably going to assume that they are going to struggle to accept your help. So that's where
Mm.
we talked about that kind of practical, like showing up. I've bought you dinner, let's go. Like I've got you movie tickets for Friday night. Are you keen? Like having that awareness and expectation. And also allowing for the space for that person during that period to maybe not be able to be as present for you as you would like. And I think that's a really important
Mm.
part of relationships is there is give and take and there is ebb and flow and it's not always equal. And that's a beautiful part of friendship is that people are there to pull you up and you'll be there to pull them up another time, but not having that unrealistic expectation that someone who is chronically and habitually burnt out is going to be able to be there for you in the same way that you would like them to be or they were previously. And just knowing that that's part of the beauty of supporting someone through different relationships and different parts of life.
I love that as a closing point. Actually, I really like that the expectations thing causes a lot of hurt, I think, for people in many
Mm,
ways. But I would also imagine, I mean, I'm not married, but as a close, intimate partner dealing with that, dropping those expectations would make everyone's life a lot easier.
absolutely.
Well, thank you for giving me your time, especially when you're in the middle of moving house. For the listeners, when I first got on this call, Charlotte showed me that she's actually halfway through packing up her house suddenly to take up some opportunities. And like I said at the start, this has been the episode that for me, I've probably put a lot of my life experience into this one. It was something that meant a lot to me. And I did it not to make it about me, but to humanize, I guess, the more clinical stuff we were talking about. So I hope it resonates with people. And I know not everyone has access to a clinical psychologist such as yourself. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your insight on the topics. And yeah, I wish you the best in your next step in life.
Thank you. Just before we close, can I ask you a question?
You absolutely can.
I've kind of touched on a lot of like stuff from research and clinical experience of what has kind of worked for different people. But I think it would be really nice to hear from you, like what was the most useful thing for your journey? Like what have you found the most helpful?
Oh, we should have put that in the plan.
Sorry, I only came up with
um,
it now.
no, you're all good. I think for me, therapy for me will always be one of the big pillars because I really struggle to, at times, not all the time, at times navigate my own emotions. So having a really good psychologist to help me when it got really bad was the first pillar. And it's going to sound a bit conflicting to everything we've just talked about being social and things like that. But I actually think one of the biggest things that, and just to be very clear, this is still something I struggle with at times. I'm not very good with stress. I never will be. And I said to myself in starting this podcast that I would be pretty open with my own mental health. And it wasn't all through therapy. It was a lot of it was trial and error as well, but learning to heal myself and learning the tools that had a big impact in moments of really high stress, whether it was breathing or acknowledging that I needed to get off my computer and go and lie down for 20 minutes and having this little arsenal of tools, which strategically I actually want to present through this podcast through different guests, such as yourself. But having all these little tips and tools that I could pull on when I needed it gave me so much confidence, especially on the days where I really didn't have any. And then I think the third thing, which we've spoken about through this whole thing, was finally, after a very long time of suffering and only really talking to about it to my psychologist and my parents, was to actually tell my friends that I was really not very good and that life didn't feel good. And I did it in quite a casual way. I actually did it in our group chat. Um, but you know what? Like, it worked. And the one thing I learned was that in groups of friends, especially, there's that I expected everyone to come running, and a lot of them did. But I remember feeling bummed that my I guess my expectation was different to what actually happened. And now in hindsight, a few years on, what I've realized is everyone is a friend in a different way. So I had friends that rung me immediately. And then I had friends who gave me some time to cool off and then came over and said nothing. We didn't even talk about it. We watched TV. And it was therapy, learning the tools within myself, and communicating to friends what was going on. So, especially because I live alone, so I had someone there that I knew when I needed it, I could message them and it wouldn't be this thing out of the blue. They'd be like, yep, sweet, I'll come over. Or yep, come over for dinner. When you build it up and then dump it on someone out of the blue, it's actually not fair on them.
Yeah. I really think that's really true.
Especially when there's expectations behind it. But if I could go back 5 years, I would have said from the start exactly how I was feeling clearly, not be dramatic about it, but just be very open about it. That's a very waffly, unprepared answer.
No, I love that. I think that was so important.
It was, and it's something I've already spoken about. It was addressing those core beliefs. And full disclosure, it's something I've not yet gotten on top of. But once, even acknowledging that belief of I'm not good enough and knowing that it's there and that it needs work, actually took so much weight off my shoulders, because suddenly that question of what the fuck is, like, why am I like this?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, that's a big contributor to why I'm like this. And now I know what I need to work on. So yeah, look below the surface. Look below the surface. Thank you for asking, actually. I think that's a nice finish. But yeah, look below the surface.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.